What the hell was that?
Well, the Adelaide Crows have demolished Essendon at the MCG, 161 to 100. We're going to get straight into it in this video. I was there. I just got home from the game, so these are my raw thoughts on the game. If you're an Essendon fan, or even if you're not an Essendon fan, you can grab a drink, grab a snack, grab an ice cold beer or a coffee and watch this video, and we're going to analyse the match and we're going to go through everything that happened in it. So Adelaide was just too good on the day. We just have to call it as we see it. They were by far the best side. This is an Essendon channel, so if any Adelaide supporters are watching this game, you were too good. If there's anything I've missed from Adelaide, please let me know. Obviously, there will be a little bit more of an Essendon focus, as you can imagine, as we focus more on the Essendon players, and there might be some stuff I've missed. So if I have missed anything, please leave a message in the comments. Well, just looking at the first quarter, the signs were there early. What struck me particularly about the Bombers was the lack of skill level. There was and it was simple stuff as well, like missing handballs, missing short kicks, slipping over, not being able to hit targets, and you couple that with a lack of pressure. And often in football, you can get away with one of those things. I mean, if your skill level is down but your pressure's up, you're probably not going to be in a great position, but you might be able to get by. Similarly, if there's no pressure but you are at least hitting your targets, you might not at least get blown off the park, but there was very little pressure and our skill level was poor, and there were some signs early. And to be honest, it could have been 4 or 5 goals of difference at quarter time.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
If you like this channel, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It'll help the YouTube algorithm if you do so. I'm at 700 subscribers, so I'm trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers, and it doesn't take any money. It doesn't take any time. It takes like 1 second. So if you could just click it right now, that would be absolutely fantastic. I would really, really appreciate it. The score was 5-5-35 to 3-2-20. Merrett was pretty good in the first quarter, having the 13 possessions, and was a shining light for Essendon. Dawson with the 10 possessions for Adelaide. And Ben Keys, in a sign of things to come, already had 3 scoring shots on the board. This guy kicked 5 goals against us the last time we met at Marvel Stadium late last season, and he would go on with another 4 goals today. You'd think Essendon would have put a little bit more work into him. Credit to him, he played fantastically well, but it was quite annoying to see the same player dominate us again for the second match in a row. So yeah, there were bad signs, or there were bad signs early. I was thinking to myself, look, at least we're only 15 points down. We really need to lift up, to increase the intensity. And we did a little bit during the second quarter, probably from the middle of the second quarter through to the last. But the reality is, we still made too many mistakes, and one of the big problems in this match was our inability to simply defend, particularly transitioning the ball from one end to the other. At half-time, Adelaide had scored 52 points from Essendon turnovers. Now, to put that into perspective, guys, the average in a match is 48 points scoring from opposition turnovers. Adelaide had scored 52 points from Essendon turnovers at half-time. So they'd exceeded the amount scored from turnover for an entire match in the space of only 60 minutes. So it goes to just goes to show the lack of pressure that Essendon was showing, being able to stop Adelaide transitioning the ball, and the amount of easy possessions inside 50. Now, look, a lot of this has to be credit to Adelaide, of course, but even in the first quarter, they had 4 marks inside 50 to Essendon's 1. And at half-time, I think it was something like 10 marks to inside 50 to 3. Now, interestingly, last week against Hawthorn, we only had 6 marks inside 50 and Hawthorn had 18. But we were able to get by and still put up a pretty encouraging performance because we dominated some other, areas of the game. We had 10 more inside 50s than Hawthorn. We had 25 more contested possessions. The problem here at half-time, we'd had only 19 inside 50s and Adelaide had 34. So there was really no positive, statistical category that we could point to that we had the better of. I mean, the signs were there last week that if we didn't have that contested possession advantage, we would have been in strife and could have lost by a lot more. Well, we didn't have that contested possession advantage today. The domination of Adelaide outmarking us inside 50 was pretty much what the same as Hawthorn was, about 3 or 4 to 1. But you couple that with very little pressure, and at the end of the day, you have a very, very one-sided result. And at half-time, Adelaide led by 40 points, 11-8-74 to 5-4-34. The third quarter started off a little bit better. We kicked a couple of goals to reduce the margin to around about 4 goals, I think it was. But then Adelaide were able to steady, and they kicked some amazing goals. I think Rankine kicked a freakish goal from the MCC member's pocket. I don't know how he threaded the net. He was as far on the boundary line as I think you could get.
That's impossible!
And this was part of the problem. At the end of the day, we just couldn't stop Adelaide scoring. Scoring 15 goals for the match. I mean, if you told me that we were going to score 15, 10, 100 for the match, I think, well, that's a reasonable score. I mean, it could be enough to win. You think, 100 points. But look, at the end of the day, we just couldn't defend and we couldn't stop Adelaide scoring. But worryingly as well, it wasn't necessarily their big tall players. There was a bit of talk about, especially with Ridley out, how Fogarty, Thilthorpe, and Taylor Walker would dominate us. Well, they kicked 7 goals, which is pretty good, but 7 goals out of 25 is actually, not that much. But it was really Rochelle who kicked 4 goals, Keys who kicked 4 goals, Rankine who kicked 2 goals. So those 3 players, Keys, Rankine and Rochelle, ended up kicking 10 goals between them, and that's the margin in the match, 10 goals. So really, we just weren't able to stop their smaller players. And really, that was very much the difference. It was a little bit like Ginnivan and Nick Watson kicking 5 or 6 goals last week. This was really the area that we're unable to stop. The big guys didn't really dominate as much as I think they would. I mean, they would have been happy with their goals with their 7-goal return, but they just cut us. But they just cut us up through the midfield, and were able to have too many uncontested possessions. Jordan Dawson had 33 possessions. Matt Crouch had 32 possessions. Saligo had 27. It was just all too easy for the Adelaide Crows. And just looking at the numbers, both teams had the same number of contested possessions. Well, it was one different. It was 127 to 126 in favour of Adelaide. But Adelaide had 258 uncontested possessions to Essendon 217. So an extra 40 possessions difference they had in the uncontested possession category, which doesn't surprise me looking at how the match played out. The amount of pressure we put on them really wasn't good enough. That's not disrespect to Adelaide, of course. At the end of the day, they fully deserved it. But really, having 41 uncontested possessions is really a blight on the way Essendon performed. So what were some of the positives from the Bombers? Well, Edwards kicked 3 goals on debut. He's a very good player. He'd averaged, I believe, in the 10 or 12 quarters that he'd played prior to this, both at the VFL level and the practice game level, he's averaging a goal a quarter. And he sort of maintained that today. Played 80% of game time, kicked 3 goals, 1, nearly took a mark on the goal line. It could have been 4 goals. So look, he'll be in the team next week. And he looks a good prospect for us. 24 years old, mature age player, which is kind of what we needed when Langford went down. Draper played most of the day at full forward and kicked the 3 goals. There was much talk about his, style of lining up for goal, even from 10 metres out, kicking from the top of the goal square. He was kicking round the corner. I really don't know why you're doing that. I was listening to the Triple N commentary, and poor old Brian Taylor was beside himself as Draper was kicking it around the corner from literally 10 metres out. But look, he kicked the 3 goals and didn't kick a point. So at the end of the day, it was a reasonably successful return for Sam Draper. But of course, the standout for the Bombers was Zac Merrett, who kicked 4 goals, which I believe is a career high, 145 Supercoach points. One of the best players on the ground, 36 possessions. And it's great that he played well, but it's also not great that he played well, because what we don't want Zac Merrett doing it all on his own every week. We want other players stepping up. And really today, it just didn't happen. It was all too much the same. Merrett was our best player. Caldwell, not surprisingly, probably our second best player. 120 champion data points and 27 possessions. I thought Nick Martin was improved on last week. I thought last week Nick Martin was poor. He had the 20 possessions and kicked a goal. They were locking down on Nick Martin. They obviously realised he was a danger. But he didn't do too bad, considering they'd put a lot of effort into him to prevent his output. I thought Nick Martin's game was a passable game. Elijah Sartis had only 63% of the time on the field. He only spent 63% of game time on the field and had the 25 possessions. So at least he's finding the ball. One of the problems I think might be Ben Hobbs. Ben Hobbs only had the 14 possessions, only 3 kicks. And this is the second week in a row he has had only 3 kicks. He had only 3 kicks against the Hawks last week. We know he's not a great kick, but I think that's playing on his mind. He's looking to handball all the time. Now, of course, if the handball's on, you should go for it. But really, 3 kicks in 2 consecutive weeks from a midfielder type player is really not what we're looking for. Kako was okay, kicked the 2 goals, didn't have that many opportunities. Caddy's struggling a little bit, got subbed off in the third quarter. I hope they keep him in the team. It's been very, very difficult for him down there. As I mentioned just earlier in this video, we had only 6 marks inside 50 against Hawthorn, and the same basically this week against the Crows, and that's not on the forwards, right? I mean, it's great if you've got a key forward who can take big contested marks, but they shouldn't be expected to take contested marks. At the end of the day, it's up to your midfield, and it's up to your team to move the ball quickly to generate scoring opportunities in there. And if the team is only generating 6 marks inside 50, then it's very, very difficult for players like Caddy to be able to generate opportunities. So we really need to look at how we move the ball in there. Mackay was poor again. Look, I defended Mackay a little bit last week. He only had the 7 touches, but 31 of the contests that came his way, he was able to either 50-50 them or win. But look, he was poor today. He was outmarked a couple of times. There was at least one time I think Tilthorpe outmarked him. And he only had the 5 possessions. He had 3 kicks, 2 handballs, and just the 2 marks. And he's down on confidence, as a lot of the players are down on confidence at the moment. So he's going to have to get better. McGrath turned the ball over too many times. Durham was passable. Shield was a little bit better than last week. He didn't quite have as many turnovers as what he did. His disposal efficiency last week was 50%. Pryor I thought was good. Pryor copped a bit of flack last week for a poor game. I didn't think he was fantastic. Look, we didn't really have too many great players, to be honest, but I thought he at least was a better player than last week. But really, there weren't too many positives for the Bombers, except for really Edwards and Merrett. They were really the 2 standouts. Yes, there were some other players that played okay, but they were the 2 players who you were thinking, well, they were sort of 7.5. Well, Merrett was probably a 9 out of 10 game, and Edwards was probably a 7 out of 10 game, and I wouldn't probably give anyone else more than a 6. It was basically a pretty average performance all round. So where does this leave Essendon? Well, it's a good question as to where Essendon is at now, because they're going to need a response next week. Win, lose or draw, they're going to need a response, because we can't go up giving up 25 goals. That is for sure. I do like to keep things in perspective on this channel. It always is easy to get emotional. That's why I try not to fall into the trap that some people do when they respond to posts on Facebook and Twitter. And if you read through those, it really is like a cesspool. It's like looking at a graffiti on a toilet wall. When you look at some of the social media comments, when people get emotional straight after the game, you think people will want to sack the coach every 6 weeks. The way people carry on, and I'm not like that. I think this is the time where you don't go overboard. Yes, it was in a very, very poor performance, but things can change around quickly in a week. Am I expecting miracles? No, but I've been watching footy long enough now to know that the phrase "a week is a long time in football" isn't just a phrase, it's a very real thing. In fact, I quite like Lee Matthews' famous quote where he says, "Things are never as good as they seem, and things are never as bad as they seem." And I think that's a pretty good way to look at football. It always feels like it's the worst thing in the world when you have a bad loss. But the good thing about football is that 7 days later, you get a chance to redeem yourself. And you'll have a totally different feeling, a totally different attitude, and hopefully a totally different outcome in a week from now. So we'll see what happens. Look, it was a poor performance. No one's hiding it from that. But I would just urge people to not get over emotional. It is easy, especially when we've been waiting so long for 2 decades for some sort of success, and you get these sort of poor performances, especially at the start of the season. But look, 7 days' time, we get a chance to redeem ourselves, and look, it's going to be a really, really important game. I probably had a little bit of clickbait in one of the titles earlier this week saying that this was a must-win game. Well, it's not a must-win game, and I wouldn't even say next week is a must-win game, but it's a must-perform game against the other Adelaide team. And Port Adelaide have given Essendon some troubles over the years. We haven't played well against Port Adelaide. As I am narrating this video, they're giving Richmond a bit of a touch-up. That's not surprising. You'd expect them to do that. But they're going to be a tough opponent, and Essendon is going to really, really need to buckle down, and we're going to have to focus on some of our weaknesses, because one of the things that has been frustrating about the Bombers over the couple of years that Brad Scott has been coach is that the areas that we've been deficient at, that namely the opposition being able to transfer the ball from one end of the ground to the other, we haven't really been able to improve in those areas. And no one's expecting the club to be perfect, but you would expect the areas that we're poor in to be areas that we would at least gradually improve. No one is expecting that if you're one of the worst teams in the competition at a particular statistical category, that you're then going to become the best at that category. That's not going to happen. But you'd think enough work would be put into that, part of the game that we wouldn't be right down the bottom. But really, to concede 25 goals today was just not good enough. And it's going to be fascinating to see how the club responds next week in what is going to be a very, very important game. Not necessarily because of the result, although that's part of it, but we'll be really, really watching as if to see if there is some improvement in both attitude and output from the Bombers. So I'm going to leave it there. This was just my raw thoughts after the game. I try to get these things up as soon as possible to give you guys some up-to-date content. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It helps the YouTube algorithm if you do so. I've currently got 700 subscribers. I'm trying to get up to 1,000, as that would allow me to monetize the channel and allow me to produce even better and more relevant content. So if you would like to click, if you wouldn't mind, could you please click like and subscribe? And I would really appreciate that if you could do that. Hopefully the Bombers can respond next week. To the Crows fans out there, congratulations. You were too good on the day, and you look every bit the finalist that everyone is saying you might be. There's always one team every season that goes from outside the top 4 from outside the top 8 into the top 4. I believe it's happened 35 times in the last 33 seasons. I did make a video about that. It happens more than once a year. That a team who missed the finals completely the season before makes the top 4 the next year, and there's every chance that the Adelaide Crows could be that team. They're injury-free at the moment. They've recruited well. They've got a good midfield, good forwards, and they are looking every bit as good. They're certainly looking much better than my Bombers at the moment. So, Essendon supporters, don't despair. Keep supporting the team. I know it's difficult, but look, a week is a long time in football, and 7 days later, we get a chance to redeem ourselves. Have a great day, everybody, and as always, go Bombers!